Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. The Sierra Conservation Center is located on 420 acres in Tuolumne County, California, near the unincorporated community of Jamestown. As of July 31st, 2022, the facility was incarcerating people at only 65.9% of its design capacity, with just over 2,500 inmates. There is an A yard, which I believe is PC, and a B and C yard, which I believe are general population. Per CDC, the primary mission of the facility is to provide housing programs and services for minimum and medium security inmates to aid in their rehabilitation. And in some cases, this is true, and in some cases, you will probably come to the conclusion that it is not. The facility is also responsible for training inmates in firefighting and the placement into the conservation camp program, which has inmate work crews who often go out and fight fires. The facility also operates the Pine Grove Youth Conservation Camp, in which youthful offenders are housed and work in a similar capacity. Like most CDC facilities, there are not just a bunch of convicts housed there looking to kill each other. As I stated in my last video, only a very small but powerful segment of the inmate population are responsible for the vast majority of violence. Many of these individuals are young guns, young torpedoes, as they're often called, ready to fulfill a mission for the big homies in the hopes of moving from the minor leagues at facilities like Jamestown up to the major leagues and more high security prisons. There are also rival sensitive needs yards groups on protected custody yards who have looked to control their piece of the action. And occasionally an older veterano will put in work or have campos, camaradas, working for them to prove they still got what it has to remain on top. But usually they'll have their minions take care of any hits or disciplinary issues.
Each prison is like, they got prisons that sometimes the busters are running in, but the Serenos were holding down Folsom, and the M is the one that runs the shit, Folsom, they're the ones that call the shots, and that's who runs it, that's who runs Folsom. And the level 2 pins and shit like that, they ain't run by nobody, it's just like a camp, you know what I mean? All the dudes that are down will be in the level 4s and shit, the ones that, shit's really kicking out. You go to like a level 2 down closer to the south, it's like there ain't even no dudes, no busters even to fight or nothing. It's just like I said, it'll either be racial, it's just be racial really.
Also, some inmates housed there, they're trying to change their lives. For instance, some individuals there fulfill a role as mentors, which I'll talk about in just a minute. There are also many other programs there, such as Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Veterans Incarcerated, Freedom and Choice, Victims Impact, Alternatives to Violence, Responsible Fatherhood, 12-Step Programs, Conflict Resolution, Criminals and Gangs Anonymous, Self-Awareness and Recovery Programs, Anger Management, and several other programs, such as Life Skills. There's a program there known as SEEK, Striving to Educate and Empower Kids, which I understand brings in at-risk youth and tries to school them on the risk of being caught up in the criminal justice system. There's also the Wake Up program conducted by the nearby Modesto Police Department with goals of creating growth, learning, and a connection with others. Many of the Sikhs' mentors were incarcerated as teenagers themselves, so would like to stop that cycle. There have been several violent incidents at the facility over the years. For instance, there was a murder that occurred on October 6, 2021 in the Prison Industry Authority area of the facility. The Prison Industry Authority, I believe, is in place at all CDC institutions. This is where inmates are supposed to learn job skills that they can use on the outside upon release. On that day, October 6th, inmate Carlos Hernandez used a pair of scissors and a pair of thread snips to attack inmate Hubert Watts, who was also working in the sewing factory. Hernandez allegedly repeatedly slashed and stabbed Mr. Watts even after he was no longer able to defend himself. Hernandez ignored civilian staff orders to stop and continued the assault of Mr. Watts even after a correctional officer used his collapsible baton to try and gain his compliance and repeatedly commanded him to stop. Watts suffered 13 slash wounds, primarily to his face and head, and a stab wound that pierced his heart that appeared to be fatal. Hernandez was initially sentenced to prison for 30 years for the kidnapping and rape of an 11-year-old girl at gunpoint, and was later sentenced to 25 years for an inmate manufactured weapon, so it sounds like he had nothing to lose, and stated that he would do it again given another chance. In January of 2025, he was given an additional 6 years plus 45 years to life, added to his other sentences, so most likely will die in prison. There have also been some violent incidents against staff. Recently, a Jamestown officer shared what she calls the worst night of her life. Correctional Officer Katie Jackson said that an inmate repeatedly sexually assaulted her at gunpoint at the facility for 4 hours, and she soon filed a lawsuit against the California Department of Corrections. Now be warned, some of these details may be a little disturbing to hear. The lawsuit outlines what occurred to Officer Jackson on January 20th, 2024. I am not sure if her assailant, Robert Lawrence Ransom, was misclassified, but he was convicted of some very horrendous crimes. And even though he did not have an R on his jacket or was convicted of any sex offenses, it sounds like he probably shouldn't have been on that yard. Evidently, shortly after he arrived at the facility, he was given a porter job for inmate trustee, and they often have fairly free roam of buildings as unit workers, and would have easier access to security breaches. As I recall, correctional counselors make work assignments, but correctional officers can write them up and ask that they be removed for good reason. All workers, whether working in the building or out to work outside of the units, dining halls, prison industry authority, etc., are supposed to be accounted for during inmate counts, which are conducted regularly, many times during the day, to ensure that there are no escapes and that the individual is not deceased. Evidently, she was in a unit control booth, and inmate Ransom is said to have hid in a laundry cart, disguised himself, and was carrying a lunch like staff often do when he jumped out of the cart at the same time that a relief officer was scheduled to relieve Officer Katie Jackson. According to the lawsuit, he knocked on the door, and the security lights and cameras in that unit were often dim or totally out. Security glass on the doors at the old Jamestown facility were often dirty and or scratched, which also limited visibility. So she mistakenly popped him in for her relief. He then grabbed her by the throat and assaulted her, grabbed the Mini 14 and pointed a gun at her. Now, when I was working, we carried 38s sidearms, so I'm not sure if she was scared or didn't have time to pull that out before he grabbed the Mini. But she states that he made her show her cell phone and threatened to kill her if she screamed and did not cooperate. When the real relief officer came shortly after, she told them that the door was not working and that she could not find the Folger Adams key to let them in manually. She states that Ransom then began to rape her. Sometime during that incident, the sergeant called after he was notified by the relief officer that she was having issues with the door. After she hung up with the sergeant, she states that he raped her some more. She then states that she assisted officers who were taking the head count, but Ransom was still not properly accounted for. A staff member is always required to have a physical ID on the inmate that should be matched up with their picture and ID card, and they need to ensure that there's a live breathing body in the location where they're supposed to be. Ransom was evidently hiding in the bathroom during this time, according to the lawsuit. She also said during the 4 hours that she was held hostage, she tried to make eye contact with officers outside of the control room by mouthing, help me," but no one noticed. She states that what ensued after the inmate gained access was the most unimaginable horrors. After it was all over, he laid the Mini 14 by the exit door and she popped him out. She states that she did not use deadly force at that time for some strange reason, and Ransom evidently had a hard time getting the door to shut properly. In order to remain safe, she had convinced Ransom that she would later bring in drugs and weapons, and evidently he believed her and returned peacefully to his cell after that. The victim states she feared that he would hurt other staff, so she waited to notify her supervisor again, and at approximately 2:35 a.m., she notified the sergeant that she had just been held hostage and raped. He inquired what happened and recommended that she go to the facility infirmary, but she demanded to go to the hospital. She then spoke with a lieutenant approximately 15 minutes later and was questioned some more, and he told her that she needed to wait until the investigative services unit arrived and would not allow her to leave. She states that she waited over an hour for an ISU officer to arrive when they took her statement. Her fiance, who was also a CO, had arrived early in the morning and demanded that she get medical attention. Authorities then took her to the hospital, but evidently took her to the wrong one at first. In her lawsuit, she noted violent offenders are not supposed to be housed at that facility, and her lawyers state that Ransom should have never been transferred to Jamestown because of his violent background as a killer. I know this story sounds almost too crazy to be true, but it appears the officer was considered to be very professional and even received an award prior to the incident. I don't know the outcome of that lawsuit yet, but if true, it sounds to me like there were multiple security breaches, a perfect storm, if you will, and she likely will be paid a very large sum of money in damages. I'm not sure that if that post-traumatic stress disorder from that day will ever go away. And in cases like this, there's a very high risk of suicide. Her lawyers state that the California model failed and called this a dereliction of duty. I thought Joshua Rascal Mason did a pretty good breakdown on this story and did his research with proven documentation, as he usually did on his episodes shortly before his recent death. I'd also like to give a shout out to Nate Dogg 916 for helping get the word out on Josh and his celebration of life. I know that Josh was a good vato, and it sounds like you are too. The California Correction Center was built in 1963 as a minimum security facility and expanded in 1987 to include facilities that would accommodate medium security inmates, and was also known as Susie's House, as it was located in Susanville. High Desert State Prison, covered in a previous video, was built right next to it in 1995. This facility also had many inmate programs, including taking care of wild horses. But there were more than just wild horses at the facility. There have been some major prison gang related incidents at Susie's house as well. On August 28, 1970, MA Associate Ruperto Chino dos Sandoval of El Hoyo Maravilla murdered NF Associate Benny Ramsey at Camp 18. Sandoval was charged in that case but was acquitted and later became a full-fledged Homero for carrying out the hit. As many of you know, the Maravillas were a big part of the early Mexican mafia, but some of them became angry with the M attacking and killing some of their homeboys. So some of them joined the Nuestra Familia, such as David Neto Varela from Fort Mara, Frank Chacon from Hoyo Mara, and Julio Escomo Vasquez, who was also from the Maravilla area in East LA. Some of the Maravillas stayed independent, while others over the years, for example, Alfred Chato Sandoval from Arizona Mara, stayed loyal to the M. On October 4th, 1972, hardcore inmate killers Dorateo Sleepy Bentoncourt from Calexico, but also was an honorary Maravilla member, and Eddie Big Pelon Moreno from Barrio Norwalk, killed Frank Damen Miranda and Richard Bullwinkle Medina at Susanville. Both were soon charged and later convicted of those murders. I gotta say, one thing I've noticed since doing YouTube is that some people claim that send them to Brazil was a common term used by La M. Now, my 6 years work in CDC and in the hundreds of C files I read during that time, I never once heard that term. And many of the emeros that I had checked up on were been active with the organization since at least the 1970s. So personally, I have a hard time believing that was commonly used. My mentor, Robert Moco Morrell, who was the first coordinator of the California Prison Gang Task Force and had boxes and boxes after retired of copy files, such as this document here, also told me that he never heard or saw that term being used by La M. So I find this claim to be very questionable. But Moco did tell me and showed me proof that MA icon Rodolfo Shaincaena did order a murder with the code words, send them to Fresno. As Moco relayed to me, El Centro de Aztlan, translated as the People's Center, was an MA-controlled drug program headed by Martin Tellez. According to Moco, MA member Frank Pancho Sáenz was given a contract by Shai Cadena to kill Tellez. And in a letter written to Pancho Sáenz that I believe was passed via his sister, Cecilia, when he is still housed at Folsom Prison, dated May 4th, 1972, he asks her to tell Pancho to see that Tellez, deliberately misspelled, is sent to Fresno. So send them to Fresno seems to be a much more common term. That has been used by other MA also, and has also been documented as being used during some recorded phone calls.
Oh, del chiquito, del pequeño. Morales.
Ajá.
Sí, dile, él va para Fresno.
About he keeps fucking up, brother, man. We got to send him to Fresno, man. I mean, I hate to say it, but...
This topic was recently covered in a video by former MA member turned informant Rene Boxer Enriquez. So claimed that send him to Brazil was a common term. But you see some things repeated so much on YouTube that many people have taken it as gospel, when really it may be just another Mother Goose tale. The West Familia was also active at the facility in past years. I understand that long-term controversial NF shot caller Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba killed an alleged rata on March 31st, 1979 at Susie's house with Pelon Garcia, CDC number B79166. I was told that the prosecutors initially rejected the case, but it looks like he was later convicted of it in April 1981. I could not find any more details on that homicide during my research, but maybe some of you have more info on that hot one. Former NF Captain John Boxer Mendoza states that he was transferred from San Quentin and housed at Susie's house as a young 19-year-old Nuestra Raza member, and states that it was about even Steven on the yard, with about 120 Sureños versus 120 Norteños. He states that he was still there when High Desert State Prison was starting construction of that new facility next door, and there was a saying there that it was always 10:30, meaning that many inmates would drop a snitch kite on you, which will be documented on a CDC 1030 confidential informant form. Around 1986 or 87, MA member Jaco Padilla from Azusa showed up from Folsom Prison and cleaned up the yard. In December of 2016, a riot erupted at the prison involving approximately 100 prisoners, and I understand that Sureños were involved in that one. In 2017, Sal Topito Diaz Gomez from Venice ran Lassen Yard, but evidently lost it to Danny Papay Roman from Harpies, and then it went to Jose Joker Gonzalez from Hazard. Before it closed, more than a dozen inmates and 2 staff members were injured in at least 3 brawls that broke out at the prison at the facility within 3 days in 2019. Understand that in at least one of those incidents, inmates in dorms set small fires in the cells in an effort to escape and break out and attack staff who responded. CDC authorities stated that non-lethal force was used to quell the violence and that numerous inmate manufactured weapons were recovered afterwards. 4 inmates were hospitalized, including 2 in critical condition with head injuries, and 11 others were treated at the prison's infirmary, which included 2 staff members, who were later transported to outside area hospitals with non-life-threatening injuries. I know that there were some other gang-related incidents at these 2 facilities, but I cannot recall any more details at this time. If you do, please feel free to share them in the comments section. Around 2004, an anti-prison political reform group, Californians United for Responsible Budgets, suggested that the facility and 3 other prisons be closed as a cost-cutting measure, but the facility continued to operate for several years. Advocates then increased their pressure, and in 2012, they gained support from the state legislator's office, requiring reduction in the severe overcrowding of state prisons. Local community supporters of the prisons, including staff and family members, sued in court to try to prevent its closure, but a court ruling was made that Governor Gavin Newsom could in fact close the prison, which did in fact occur on June 30th, 2023. Now, given Gavin's aspirations of running for U.S. president in election year 2028, I predict that his policies on CDC, in particular his poor leadership choice of Director Jet McCormer and the high violence and homicide rate in custody, even after letting out so many prisoners, will come back to haunt him. Some of those released individuals, I imagine, are truly reformed and haven't had a write-up in years. Others, I'm not so sure. And in spite of statistics, violent crime is still a major issue in California, and instead of being housed in prisons, many of them are now housed in overcrowded county jails. It is my belief that Newsom may be portrayed as being weak on public safety, which is a big issue in my book and many others. Now, I know I left out a few adult institutions in this series, but I really didn't have much to report on those. I think I did tell you guys that my mother-in-law worked as a sergeant at Avenal after she left Chino. She then became a correctional counselor at Avenal before she returned back to LA and worked as a parole agent. Just as a side note, I remember one time she took me along to the Jungles, which is Black Keystone turf in South Central LA. The same apartments that were shown in Training Day, and it was like the party of the Red Seas when she came through. Heck, she could have violated half the neighborhood, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I was a little scared at the time. She only stood maybe 5'4" tall, and although she was armed, I'm sure the homies had much more firepower stashed away. But she walked through like no sweat, and the residents there gave her nothing but respect. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. So I said to myself, I guess it's okay. I'll never forget that moment for the rest of my life. I also didn't cover Wasco, which I believe is a reception center now. And I think they've had some incidents at both places. But like I said, I just don't have a lot of details on that. So this is your last chance to ask about CDC joints if you have any lingering questions. But I think I covered quite a bit in this series, and like I said, the feedback has been pretty good. I also learned a few things also from some of you, the viewers. So once again, I really appreciate your respectful feedback and comments. We have one video left in this series, and that will be a quick rundown of California Youth Authority facilities and a few notable events that happened there over the years before most of them were shut down or incorporated as being overseen by the adult system. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.